That morning seemed like any other. I was in the bathroom finishing my morning routine when Ethan, my stepson, did something I never expected. His initially innocent gesture ended up changing our relationship in a way I could never have imagined. I accepted his help, but what followed not only surprised me, but also made me question everything I believed about my life and myself. If you want to know how we reached that point, stay tuned because this story has twists that even I couldn't have predicted. It all started so subtly that at first I barely noticed it. Ethan had always been kind, polite, and considerate. Someone easy to live with. There was never anything out of place in his behavior, but one day something changed. It was as if his way of looking at me held a different meaning, one I couldn't clearly define. I remember moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but now, looking back, I feel they marked a before and after, like that time in the kitchen when he asked me something trivial, but his eyes lingered on mine for a moment longer than necessary. At the time I convinced myself it was just a coincidence, but it wasn't. Then there was that day in the dining room when I was organizing some papers, and Ethan walked past me, brushing my hand as he took something from the table. It was minimal contact, but I felt as if time stood still. For a second I froze, not knowing if it was real or if my mind was playing tricks on me. Was there more to those gestures, or was I starting to see things that weren't there? But what really changed everything was that night. I was in the living room, enjoying a moment of tranquility, when Ethan sat down in front of me. He looked at me, hesitated for a moment, and finally spoke. He asked me a question I didn't expect. Have you ever felt like you didn't belong anywhere? His words caught me off guard. I looked at him, waiting for him to continue, and he did. He talked about his fears, the pressure of expectations, and how sometimes he felt like he was never enough for anyone. It was the first time I saw him like that, so honest, so vulnerable that I remained silent while he spoke, as if each word he said was a confession. I couldn't help but feel something I couldn't explain. I realized that I no longer saw him as just Daniel's son. In that moment, he was someone who needed to be heard, someone who had decided to trust me. That night left a mark on me. I couldn't stop thinking about his gaze, the way his words echoed in my mind. Why did it affect me so much? Why did I feel this unexpected connection with him? I started noticing things I hadn't seen before, or maybe I just didn't want to see them. That's when I understood that something was changing between us. I didn't know how to handle it, didn't know if it was real or if it was all in my head, but deep down, I knew this wouldn't stop here. Something had begun, and although I didn't fully understand what it was, I couldn't ignore it. What happens when the unexpected starts to change everything? After that night, everything felt different. I tried to convince myself that I was just imagining things, that Ethan's words were just a simple conversation and nothing more. But it wasn't that simple. There was something in the way he looked at me, in the way he approached me, that kept lingering in my mind. I told myself it meant nothing, that it was just kindness, that I was misinterpreting things. But the more I thought about it, the more doubts arose. It was as if my mind was split in two, one part telling me it was all in my head, and the other screaming that things had changed. Sometimes I tried to avoid him. I locked myself in my room, kept myself busy with anything that could keep me away from him. But we were in the same house. It wasn't that easy. There were moments when I caught him looking at me, and I couldn't help but wonder if he felt the same confusion I did. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ethan came into the kitchen. He stood close to me, closer than he ever had before. I could feel his presence, and it made my heart race. He reached for a plate, his hand brushing against mine again. This time I didn't freeze. I looked up at him and our eyes met. There was a tension in the air, a silent understanding that something was happening between us. "I'm sorry," he said softly, but he didn't move away. "It's okay," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. It was as if time had stopped again, and we were both aware of the unspoken words hanging in the air. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same conflict I felt inside me. That night after dinner, we found ourselves alone in the living room again. The TV was on, but neither of us was watching it. Ethan turned to me, his expression serious. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice steady but gentle. I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. I think I'm falling for you. I know it's wrong and I know it's complicated, but I can't help how I feel." His words hit me like a wave. I had suspected it, had felt it in the way he looked at me, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. I didn't know what to say, how to react. All I knew was that I felt the same way, and it terrified me. Ethan. I started, but the words caught in my throat. He reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know. I looked down at our hands, then back up at him. I feel it too, I admitted, my voice barely audible. His eyes widened in surprise, but then a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Really? I nodded, a tear slipping down my cheek. Yes. And I don't know what to do about it. He squeezed my hand gently. We'll figure it out together. That night marked the beginning of something new and uncertain. We both knew the challenges ahead, the judgments we might face, but we also knew that what we felt was real. It was a journey we were willing to take. Together, as I looked at Ethan, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected connections can change our lives in ways we never imagined. And maybe, just maybe, those are the connections worth fighting for. If you've ever felt a connection that defied all logic, if you've ever questioned the boundaries of love and loyalty, then you know how complicated and beautiful life can be. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. And let me know in the comments if you've ever experienced something similar. Until next time, take care.